Hi, good afternoon. Today I would like to talk about how an elephant uses its trunk and lungs to, to drink water. Firstly, imagine that an elephant is near a pond and it has dipped its trunk into the pond and it is ready to take in water. Ultimately, the mechanism is it takes water through its trunk. It can't drink water through its trunk. It has to direct that water towards its mouth. It curls its trunk and directs that water towards its mouth. But while directing that water towards its mouth when the water is in the trunk, there is a certain amount of physics that is involved. The elephant makes use of its lungs. It compresses or expands its lungs to ensure that the water has enough force, the water within the lungs has enough force to come out of the trunk and get directed towards its mouth. So today in this video I'll be talking about the physics principles involve that are involved when the water is directed out of the trunk of an elephant. So the elephant had dipped its trunk in the water. Let us say it is in front of a pond and it dipped its trunk in the pond. Firstly, I would like to turn your consciousness towards air pressure. Air pressure, there is air pressure all around. There is pressure of air on the body of the elephant. There is a pressure on the ground and also on the surface of the pond. That is the atmospheric pressure of the air. There is also air pressure of air molecules, which is not atmospheric pressure, and these are air molecules within the trunk of the elephant. Firstly, imagine that the tip of the trunk of the elephant is touching the water, and within the tip of the trunk of the elephant there are some air molecules, and these air molecules exert some pressure on the surface of the water the trunk is in contact with. And there are air molecules within the length of the trunk, and there are air molecules within the lungs as well, and these air molecules also exert pressure within the lungs in the trunk. So on one hand we have atmospheric pressure, which is pressing on the surface of the pond outside the trunk. On the other, there is pressure of air, same air molecules inside the trunk as well as inside the lungs of the elephant. So now it is the air pressure within the trunk and the lungs that the elephant has control over to ensure that the water enters its lungs in the first place, ultimately to be directed towards the mouth later. But let us focus on what is happening inside the lungs. Let us see. We will see that water enters the lungs as the elephant controls the pressure of the air molecules within its lungs as well as within its trunk. So how does the elephant control the pressure of the air molecules within its lungs? That is the first question we should ask. What it does is it expands its rib cage with the strong chest muscles it has, and because of that the lungs also expand. Initially, before expansion, there are some air molecules within the lungs that are hitting the interiors of the lungs, and there is some air pressure. But after the elephant has expanded, there is extra space for these air molecules inside the lungs, and they could occupy these extra spaces. In other words, they kind of expand with the lungs as well. Now this has a consequence or bearing on the air molecules within the trunk at the tip of the trunk. where the air molecules are hitting the surface of the water, which is in contact with the trunk. What really happens is the air molecules within the trunk get reduced because it is an entire pathway from the trunk to the lungs. There are two flexible pipes within the trunk, which are called nostrils, which connect the tip of the trunk to the lungs. So there are two pathways like this for the air molecules to move. So when the lungs expand, when the air molecules within the lungs have more space to occupy themselves in, the air molecules within the lungs also have some extra space to get to occupy themselves, and because of that the pressure of the air molecules within the trunk, within the tip of the trunk, which is in contact with the surface of the cool water, reduces. The pressure of the such air molecules reduces, and what that really means is there are fewer molecules within the tip of the trunk, and they are not colliding as much as they did in the past when the lungs have not expanded. They're more or less going at the same speed, but there are, most important point is they're not colliding as much as they did, and there are not as many molecules as they used to be near the within the tip of the trunk. And what this means is there is a reduction in the pressure of those air molecules within the tip of the trunk that are in touch with water. And this has a profound consequence. Now let us look at those air molecules which are pressing on the surface of the water outside the trunk, the atmospheric pressure. As the elephant expands its lungs and reduces the air pressure of the air molecules within the trunk, within the tip of the trunk, the atmospheric pressure, there would be a point when the atmospheric pressure, the pressure of the air molecules touching the surface of the water outside the trunk, would be higher than what it is for the pressure of the air molecules within the tip of the trunk touching the water molecules. And the consequence of this is, because the atmospheric pressure is higher than the pressure within the tip of the trunk, the atmospheric pressure pushes the water of the pond into the trunk of the elephant. So all this is happening because the elephant has expanded its lungs. If the elephant had not expanded its lungs, the atmospheric pressure is more or less constant. It does not change. It only becomes higher once the elephant expands its lungs than the pressure of the molecules within the tip of the trunk. So I showed you how the water enters the trunk of the elephant because of the pressure difference between the air molecules within the tip of the trunk and the air molecules on the surface of the pond outside the trunk. The water is directed towards the trunk of the elephant. But just merely having water in the trunk of the elephant is not enough for it to drink, because the elephant cannot drink through its trunk. So even before that, I have one more point to say. We should also question how much water enters the trunk. There is a maximum limit to how much water can enter the trunk. We have seen that water enters the trunk because the atmospheric pressure is higher than the pressure of the molecules within the tip of the trunk. But there is also a limit to how much water enters the trunk. There is a point, and this point happens when the air molecules inside the lungs and inside the trunk, get really close together. And when I say close together, they should be as close as they were when the lungs had not expanded in the first place. So only when that point is reached, the water ceases to enter the trunk, and the elephant also stops expanding its lungs. So at this moment of time, the situation is certain amount of water has entered the trunk, the water ceased to enter beyond that point. There is no more water that is entering the trunk, and the elephant, which was initially expanding its lungs, has also ceased from expanding its lungs. Next coming to the point, now the elephant cannot drink through its trunk. It has to direct and curl and direct its trunk towards the mouth to ensure that and it also has to ensure that the water enters the mouth from the trunk. You can't just depend on gravity. There is another mechanism to ensure that the water is directed towards the mouth. And this mechanism is also based on the pressure difference between the atmosphere and the air molecules within the trunk. So let me go ahead and explain how this pressure difference is created. As I already told you, the elephant has stopped expanding its lungs. It's in a process of compressing its lungs. Okay, and how does it do it? It has to compress its chest muscles, because of which the ribs also kind of exert the pressure to the lungs. The lungs are within the ribs, so the lungs will compress in size or volume. And because the lungs compress in size and volume, the air molecules within the lungs also compress. They were already close together before the lungs have compressed. Now, with more compression of the lungs, they get more and more close together. They have less and less space to occupy, because of which they collide much better with the water surface inside the trunk. They are colliding as hard as they can possibly collide when the lung has completely compressed. They are colliding. There are more molecules that are colliding at the surface of the water within the trunk than before the actual compression has occurred, or before or even during the process of compression. When the lung had completely compressed to a smaller size, there are two things that are happening. The air molecules are close together. There are more air molecules that are hitting the surface of the water within the trunk, and they are hitting really hard. So what this essentially means is the pressure of the air molecules that are hitting the surface of the water within the trunk has increased, and it will increase to a point where the atmospheric pressure outside the trunk is less than what it is within the trunk, than what it is for the molecules that are hitting the surface of the water within the trunk. And now I think you can guess what happens when the pressure inside the trunk, the pressure of the air molecules that are hitting the surface of the water, is higher than the atmospheric pressure outside. Now remember, the elephant had already curled itself and directed its trunk towards its mouth. So it is the atmospheric pressure, means the pressure of the air molecules outside the trunk. In the past, when the elephant had dipped its trunk into water, the atmospheric pressure was hitting against the surface of the water. Here there is no water, but still there is atmospheric pressure of the molecules. And as the pressure within the trunk has become more than what it is in the atmosphere, the water inside the trunk is pushed out, and now you can see that the water is getting directed towards the mouth of the elephant. So successfully it quenches its thirst. And most importantly, through this video, what I wanted to emphasize is that elephant controls its size of the lung to control the pressure of the air molecules within the lungs and consequently within the trunk, and enable it to allow water to come into its trunk in one case and also exit the trunk in another case. In the case when it had enabled the water to come inside the trunks, it had expanded its lungs. Or when the water when it wanted the water to leave the trunk, it had compressed its lungs. So it is always stimulating to understand the application of the pressure difference in real life. And that's why I found this topic interesting and I wanted to share this with you. Thank you.